Thank you for joining us on the ABC 10 Plus app. I'm Alex Bell. President Trump's first days in office are off to a fast start. Over the next half hour, we're looking at what some of his actions could mean for us here in California. Friday evening, just as we were recording this segment, the president visited the Pacific Palisades area, walking the streets of neighborhoods where homes were reduced to rubble, meeting with fire survivors and joined by fire officials and, of course, First Lady Melania Trump. Governor Gavin Newsom greeted Trump at LAX. Newsom says this is the first time the two have spoken since Trump's first term. The two have clashed in the past month, with Trump threatening to withhold federal aid unless California changes its water policies. They had a brief exchange with reporters before taking off to see the wildfire damage. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
We're going to need your support. We're going to need your help. You were there for us during COVID. I don't forget that. And I have all the expectations that we'll be able to work together to get this speedy recovery.
We will. We're going to get it done.
Is pledging the support of the federal government, saying so in a roundtable with members of Congress. He mentioned being shocked by what he saw, and he said he will declare a national emergency for these fires, waiving environmental permits to build faster, and comments about California sending more water to LA were made.
I'm signing an executive order to open up the pumps and valves in the north. We want to get that water pouring down here as quickly as possible and let hundreds of millions of gallons of water flow down into Southern California. And that'll be a big benefit to you. Look, if you don't want it, you're going to tell me, but I can't imagine it. I tell you who does like it is the fire department. When I said that, they were very happy with that.
In ABC 10's previous reporting with our National Verify team, experts say that most of the water for Los Angeles doesn't come from the Central Valley water systems that Trump is referring to, but places like the Colorado River and Owens Valley, and don't believe this would have helped in those LA fires. The president also made comments about FEMA, some of which was also said in North Carolina on Friday.
I'll also be signing an executive order to begin the process of fundamentally reforming and overhauling FEMA, or maybe getting rid of FEMA. I think, frankly, FEMA is not good.
Trump has suggested that states be in charge of managing catastrophes, suggesting limits to the federal government's role in responding to disasters. On Thursday, California lawmakers approved more than $2.5 billion for Los Angeles in recovery aid for those deadly wildfires. A news conference was held in Altadena where Governor Newsom signed the legislation. This funding will help with emergency disaster response efforts such as evacuations, shelters, hazardous waste removal, and rebuilding homes and schools. Lawmakers and the Newsom administration say the state expects to be reimbursed by the federal government for the disaster relief funding. And I want to go ahead and bring in our political analyst, Steve Swatt, who is going to be helping us break everything down because we know it's a lot of information. So, Steve, thank you so much for being here with us.
Sure.
We really appreciate it. My first question is how significant is this money in addressing those immediate needs for these wildfire victims in this wildfire recovery effort? And is it enough money?
First of all, it's not enough money, but it does help address the debris cleanup, and that's what you have to do first. But beyond that, you're going to have all the rebuilding efforts, and that's going to cost many billions of dollars. I mean, the original estimate for this fire loss was about like $50 billion. Now it's what, $250 billion?
Grown
I mean, that's
a lot.
amazing. Clearly, California is going to need some help from the federal government.
Talk about how Governor Newsom's leadership plays into the state navigating wildfire relief and also securing support.
Well, it's interesting because obviously he has to go through President Trump to get some more support. And he has a very, shall we say, complex relationship with the president. Back during the COVID crisis, he actually worked with the president on a number of issues, and they tended to get along. Now there have been a lot of back and forths. The president belittles Governor Newsom every time he gets a chance. He believes that Governor Newsom, helped create the fires in Southern California to start with, and the governor has shot back too. And so they have a very nuanced relationship, and that relationship, one way or the other, could be important because California needs, as I said, federal relief. And President Trump has said, Whether he's posturing or not, we don't know, but he has said he might just get rid of FEMA and make the states pay for all their fire relief efforts.
Well, I do want to touch on that in a second, but I want to acknowledge that we know that Trump has threatened to withhold federal disaster aid for Los Angeles unless California leaders change their water management practices. Right. It is something that Newsom continues to address over and over. I actually want to go to what Newsom had to say on Thursday in regards to this when he was signing some of that aid relief.
So what about some of the concerns about the president saying that there should be limits on the funding for California unless the state does some sort of water?
Well, it's some sort of that is confusing to not just you, but to every expert and everyone that's tried to review it. The State Water Project has nothing to do with the fires here, nothing, period, full stop. It's not he said, she said. This is not just an assertion, it's a foundational fact. And I think it's really important in terms of how we express the reporting here that we deal not just with both sidesism. The State Water Project has nothing to do with water supply as it relates to water suppression for municipal systems. The state reservoirs are at or near record highs, and the issues around the Endangered Species Act have been issues that have been litigated and adjudicated and politicized for as long as I've been alive. They're not novel to this administration. They go back to the George H.W. Bush administration.
All right, so obviously we just heard from Governor Gavin Newsom. My question is, can President Trump withhold aid? Can he make disaster aid conditional? Can he do that?
Well, from my reading of the law, he would need approval from Congress to play around with FEMA or even get rid of FEMA. And that would be interesting because if he should get rid of FEMA, for example, and make California pay for everything, what does that do to Florida, for example, where they have hurricanes, a Republican state, or Texas, where they have hurricanes, a Republican state, or other Republican states? So I think there's a lot of pushback to his efforts to either get rid of FEMA or to put conditions on relief for Californians. And it's a political issue for him because what does he want? He wants the California Water Project basically to ship more water through the Delta to the farms in the San Joaquin County. Well, these farms generally are Republican owned. And if you drive down Highway 99, you can see the signs. They've been fighting, Democratic water policy for decades. And so there's a lot of politics being played here. And I think if the politics get too overt, that will not inure well for President Trump.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you is, could this set a precedent for future federal-state relations when it comes to, disaster relief and disaster aid?
Well, it could, because what the president wants to do is to change the relationship between the state and the federal government. Now, maybe he's just posturing. He does that a lot. Maybe he's just throwing stuff out to get people riled up. But if you're going to make the state of California pay for the entire relief effort, state goes broke almost. This is very, very expensive, and I would think other states, Republican states as well, wouldn't like this at all. And that's why there is some pushback among Republicans in Congress from purple districts, shall we say, who are urging, no, let's just give them the relief that they deserve, that we give to other states, and not play politics with this.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask you is, what are the potential impacts for the Republican Party and their unity, specifically California Republicans who might oppose, conditional aid,
and most of them are opposing conditional aid. In the legislature, Senator Nilo, for example, says, we can talk about reforming the system, doing better forest management later on, but right now these people are hurting and they need this aid. And so right now, that issue is splitting part of the Republican Party. And there are some who don't want to give California any money at all. And pundits on Fox television, they don't either. But for the most part, a lot of Republicans who feel vulnerable politically are saying, no, we have to give them the aid without conditions.
And I do want to switch now and talk about immigration because President Donald Trump, he has introduced many new rules and changes already to federal immigration. One of them already being challenged in the courts, Trump's executive order trying to end birthright citizenship. Mary Bruce explains what happened.
A federal judge temporarily blocking President Donald Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship, calling it blatantly unconstitutional. Trump signing the order just hours after he was sworn in.
Birthright. That's a big one.
Birthright citizenship is protected by the 14th Amendment. Now 22 states and 2 cities filing suit to block Trump's order from going into effect. Seattle Judge John Kuhnauer saying it boggles my mind that any lawyer would consider the order constitutional.
Obviously, we'll appeal it. They put it before a certain judge in Seattle, I guess, right? And there's no surprises with that judge.
That judge appointed by President Ronald Reagan.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta among those who filed a lawsuit to block this order. Here's what he had to say on Tuesday.
I want to be clear that this isn't some theoretical legal disagreement I have with the president. If allowed to stand, this order would endanger thousands of U.S. citizens who will be born in the next year, real children and families just trying to live their lives in peace.
Previous U.S. Supreme Court decisions have established that anyone born on U.S. soil becomes a citizen. But President Trump argues this doesn't apply to babies born to mothers who are undocumented or here temporarily if the father is not a citizen or lawful permanent resident. Now, ABC 10 also spoke to a constitutional law expert this week about the executive order, saying she believes this case will ultimately end up at the Supreme Court before anything could possibly change. Again, turning to you, Steve, right now, as you saw, this executive order already, temporarily blocked, facing some pushback. Give us some insight on why the Trump administration would introduce this executive order.
Well, I think the Trump administration is at war with undocumented immigrants, and there's no question about it, and this sort of plays into that game plan. What is really interesting is that the idea of birthright citizenship occurred after the infamous Dred Scott decision in 1857, which said that blacks could not be citizens in the United States. And 11 years after that, a constitutional amendment, the 14th Amendment, was ratified by the voters that established birthright citizenship. So you would think that with that precedent that would stand in the present day. You never know with this Supreme Court, though, and it will get to the Supreme Court.
You think it will get there?
Oh, I think it certainly will, because I personally...
There's so much pushback already.
I think the president will lose at every step, but keep on going. And if he doesn't win, at least it's good for his image with some of the folks that support him, who are really anti-immigration.
Talk about some of the impacts and changes that this could have. Changing birthright citizenship. What are some of the impacts it could have on people that are wanting to come into the country?
Well, I think a lot of them won't, and I think that's one of the reasons that the president is pushing this forward to basically disincentivize people from coming across the border to seek asylum or to become citizens.
And this week, President Trump also authorized ICE to target courthouses, schools, and churches by revoking a directive to federal immigration authorities that banned arrests in these locations, also known as sensitive areas. This directive was first enacted back in 2011. Schools and houses of worship were off limits, along with hospitals, funerals, weddings, and public demonstrations. In a statement, the Department of Homeland Security said law enforcement would use common sense in making arrests and said, quote, the Trump administration will not tie the hands of our brave law enforcement and instead trust them to use common sense. But what does this mean for sanctuary cities like Sacramento? Here's reporter Roxanne Elias.
The city of Sacramento is known for being a sanctuary city.
Well, we're a very diverse city. We're known as the most integrated city in America. A lot of immigrant and refugee communities have been coming to Sacramento for decades. And so a lot of questions and fear right now from the immigrant community as far as what's next.
In the past, places like churches, schools, and hospitals were deemed sensitive areas for migrants to seek protection. On Tuesday, the Trump administration rolled that policy back, allowing ICE and Customs and Border Patrol to enter these buildings and arrest migrants. Sacramento Mayor Kevin McCarty says he's in talks with other mayors and how they can protect their communities.
We get it that the federal government has their opportunities to focus on violent criminals who are undocumented, to focus on deportation for those individuals. But going to churches and schools and, focusing on people that are illegally selling tamales out front of Walmarts, that probably doesn't make the most sense.
He says the city of Sacramento does not enforce immigration or ask people about their status. Blake Nordahl, a law professor at the McGeorge School of Law, says regardless, everyone is protected by the Constitution of the United States under the 4th and 5th Amendment. And there's a limit to what ICE can and cannot do, considering a public or private space. Take, for example, a school.
They have the right to ask questions, is such and such parent here. But they can't access a private portion of these facilities, like a classroom or an area that's designated as private by the school, without a judicial warrant.
Nordahl says there are ways these places can protect themselves, and they need to have a designated person at these locations that has received training and understands their rights.
Understands what a judicial warrant is and what are the requirements. And because if it's not there, then the ICE officer is not able to enter into a private area without the consent of the individuals that are maintaining that facility.
Mayor McCarty says he's waiting to hear facts on how this will be implemented as he continues to support immigrants in Sacramento.
Right now, it's a sense of confusion and fear. There's a lot of unanswered questions. We're not trying to get ahead of this. We want to see how this plays out.
First question, why is the Trump administration doing this?
Well, this was one of the key points of his platform running for office. He promised the largest mass deportation in history, and this is just one element of that. And so he's trying to, obviously round up people wherever he can and send them out if they're undocumented.
How do you think this will change or shape the broader debate on immigration reform here in the U.S.?
Well, it's interesting because already we have some anecdotal information about, in some parts of the country, about the effect of this effort. Immigrants are refusing to send their kids to school in some locations. Some now will not go to hospitals because of possible raids. Can you imagine if these individuals have communicable diseases and they're out not being treated? They will not be going to hospitals. Churches are worried that people will not show up at churches, and so this really is going to fundamentally perhaps change the way people live in certain communities.
What do you think could be some of the potential impacts if state or local departments, agencies do not comply?
I would imagine that the president would try to halt funding to those states.
If they don't comply with ICE enforcement?
Yes, halt funding. I mean, with federal funds, look at the California budget. 1/3 of California's $300 billion budget is federal monies. And so, the president controls the purse strings on a lot of that. So does Congress. And so that is an issue that's likely to come up and be a problem going forward.
And another big topic of conversation that I'm sure everyone's aware about is tariffs. So I do want to talk about tariffs because this week the president said he will impose tariffs on February 1st on products from Canada, Mexico, and China. It said that together these countries account for more than 1/3 of U.S. trade. The comments come after Trump discussed more of his economic agenda in a virtual discussion at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland on Thursday. He threatened tariffs against businesses that don't make their products in the United States. Take a listen.
Make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury to strengthen our economy and pay down debt.
While Trump has claimed tariffs won't adversely impact the U.S., economists generally agree that consumers will face higher costs for goods. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says if Trump imposes tariffs on Canada, two things will happen.
One, Canada will have a strong, robust response, because we don't want this, but we will respond if necessary. And two, prices for American consumers on just about everything will go up.
Canadian officials also warned that Americans in some states could pay $1 per gallon more for gas if Trump puts the tariff on Canadian oil. So, Steve, I want to look at both sides because there are, two parties saying two different things. Can you give some perspective from both sides on what they're saying these tariffs will do, not only to our broader economy, but also local economies?
Well, let's start first with the president's side. He believes in America first. I mean, you see that on the bumper stickers during the campaign. And so he sees this as a way of boosting business and profits inside America. You are less likely to buy an imported product if it costs too much, and you will buy it locally. It will also incentivize, he believes, business to grow inside this country. The flip side, of course, is what happened. Well, first of all, the costs will go up. I mean, because if you pay a 15% tariff, that's like a 15% tax. The importer pays that tax and passes it on to the consumer. So we at home will pay more for those goods that in fact are imported, which we buy. Another fact is what happens if there is retaliation, and you heard from Trudeau that they will respond strongly. What happens if Canada, for example, decides, okay, we're going to put a tariff on some of your goods, and so that when our businesses in California, let's say, try to export their products, it's going to cost more for people to buy them, and their sales will go down. And that's exactly what happened during Trump's first term, when he put tariffs on imports. One other point I'll bring up is that, and it's sort of tangential, is that one of the biggest exporter of lumber is Canada. And so if a tariff is placed on lumber products coming into California, what does that do to the price of lumber? It goes up. We need lumber, not only to rebuild the homes in Southern California, but to help with our housing crisis and to build more houses. And so tariffs can cause all sorts of problems. And not just inflation, as you mentioned before, but also some experts cited by the Wall Street Journal, a conservative publication, said interest rates will go up and the national debt will go up.
And what about people on the other side? What are they saying?
Well, on the other side, it's basically you're making American businesses stronger because when the price of imported goods are higher, people will go to a domestic producer. And so you're helping the business community and in the long run, they say, consumers in this country.
What do you think the long-term goals are for these tariffs?
I'm not sure. President Trump can be a bully at times, and he may be using this as a bargaining chip. He wants certain things. For example, he has said that, well, maybe I won't impose the tariffs on Mexico and Canada if they tighten up things at their border and prevent people coming into the U.S. That way. And so he may be using this as a bargaining chip to get something else. I mean, it's just like, he says, change our water policy and then we'll give you some funds, for the wildfires in Southern California. I mean, he's a wheeler and dealer, and so this is maybe one of his efforts to do that.
I do want to talk about a conversation that us here in California are revisiting again. It's a topic that we're familiar with, and that's a California secession movement. The California Secretary of State just announced there's an initiative for the November 2028 ballot asking whether California should be its own country. It is clear to start gathering signatures. We spoke to the founder of CalExit, who is behind the movement of this measure.
The other thing the initiative does is it places a vote in the future on the ballot saying, do you want to be independent from America, basically. That's not legally binding. Doesn't mean that it makes it happen.
The measure, if it makes it to the ballot and is approved by voters, would form a commission to report on the viability of California as its own country and potentially gets the process moving. CalExit, they tried this back in 2016, but they believe that this time the results will be different. So, of course, Steve, my question to you is it different this time? What are the chances of this really moving forward? And how do you think Californians will consider it after this presidential election?
Well, I remember a poll in 2017 during the first Trump administration, and as I recall, 1/3 of Californians said, hey, man, that's not such a bad idea. And obviously it didn't go anywhere. And it's not going to take a lot to get it on the ballot. So it'll be an interesting plebiscite vote. But it's interesting because after the Civil War, there was a U.S. Supreme Court decision based on Texas's desire to secede that said a state cannot secede from the Union, flat out cannot. Now that can always be changed. You have a Supreme Court now that is not always faithful to precedent, even though they've said they are, and so they could certainly change that. But as it stands right now, if California really does want to secede, it would have to get 2/3 vote in the House of Representatives, 2/3 vote in the U.S. Senate, and 3/4 of the legislatures would have to say yes. Now, there are certainly some problems with California seceding and becoming our own country. Yes, we're the 5th largest economy in the world. However, we would not have Social Security in that case. We'd have to pay for that ourselves, or Medicaid, other health care issues. A defense, we'd have to build up our own military.
A lot to consider.
I mean, there is a great deal to consider, yeah.
Yeah. Steve Swatt, as always, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And you already know, if there's something that you want answers to or you want our team to look into, you can always reach out to us. It is our job as a local news station to get you that information, to get your questions answered. And look, we know things are moving very fast. We know that a lot of new information is coming out, but we will do our best to try to make sure that you are informed and you get those questions answered. As always, thank you so much for joining us. And don't forget, our coverage never ends here. You can always stream us for free wherever you are, whenever you want, on our free ABC 10 Plus app. And you can always reach out to our news team.
Hi, I'm Alex Bell. Join me weeknights at 6:30 on To The Point. Instead of just reporting on the problems, we cut through the noise and look for solutions. We're not afraid to investigate local stories. We're not afraid to include different perspectives. We're not afraid to hold those in power accountable. This is your community, and it's my community too, and we're here to make it better for everyone. Join me, Alex Bell, on To The Point, weeknights at 6:30, only on ABC 10.